Okay, we're ready to go.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you. This is our first budget committee meeting of the year. We'll do these a couple more times throughout the year, throughout the budget process. Basically, what we wanted to do today was walk you guys through kind of where we're at, kind of what we're looking at, get into a little estimation and projections, and then kind of talk to you about what we're thinking and where we're going from there. So go ahead and go to that next slide, Amy, if you would, please. And so again, the purpose of this committee is to provide guidance and direction from the board and from the members of the committee to myself, Jenny, and Cynthia as we move forward with this. Go ahead, next slide, Amy. So again, these are our budget goals, and this is one area I wanted to focus on a little bit today. These are the 4 goals from last year. The first one being staffing, second, curricular support, third, facilities and buildings, and fourth, equity. Was there any thought of changing, rearranging, placing an emphasis on any of those, or adding one that we may have missed? Okay, would there be any interest in rearranging those?
Well, I hadn't really thought in those terms, but I would be curious about why equity wouldn't be bumped up, particularly in a time like now when communities, especially in North County, are particularly distressed.
No, I was kind of thinking that same thing as I was reviewing this last night. I thought maybe with your staffing, your curricular support, facilities and buildings, equity wants to bump up according to the group. I think that would make sense to me. It would just depend on how high you wanted to put it, which I can see it going in any one of those slots.
I mean, that would be my interest. I'm curious about everyone else.
Yeah, Scott, I think that when I look at it, these were goals that were kind of established by the past board, and this was the order that they were. And I think now that we've defined equity more, we've got more around it, and we've got our whole equity plan, bumping it up, either number 1 or number 2 would be appropriate, because I think the facilities and buildings, those are sitting good. I feel like curricular support, we're getting better there. Staffing, we still have some work to do on that. And then the equity piece could probably, that's the number 1 thing I would see as the focus area. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm in agreement with that, 1 or 2. I think, it goes right along the lines with staffing. I think that's what jumps in my mind the most is, making sure that we are adequately staffed in the schools in my sub-districts in particular, but, I don't want to speak for other interests and needs that we have.
So as I was listening, I kind of think you start with that staffing, and then you introduce the staffing piece of it, and then you move right into that equity piece. And then you can go from staffing to equity into curriculum, all 3 key components, and then we can go into buildings and finance, or buildings and facilities after that. Would that work? So move equity to number 2 and bump the other 2 down? Okay.
Works for me.
Okay, good. I like that. Okay. Any other thoughts, concerns, questions with wording, definitions of goals? Okay, and if there is, ever any questions or anything, go ahead and just fire away, ask questions, and we can always address it. Amy, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is our ASBR, and this is where we finished the year. I wanted to revisit this as we go into next year, or as we go into the budgeting for next year. So you can see there in the first column, our beginning fund balances were $318 million. Total revenue for last year in our general was $223 million, and our teachers fund was $232. So basically you take that down, you subtract out the expenditures, which was 197 million in our general fund and 246 in our teacher fund. And you get a remaining fund balance of $330 million. That puts us at a percentage of 74.52. That's where we were last year. And that's exactly where, by implementing the stipend, we talked about where that would put us. So that is exactly where we projected to be at the end of the fiscal year after the stipend. If we don't put the stipend in, that number's up to almost 78.5%. And so that would have been more than where we wanted to be. We don't, we've talked about it. That 74 number is pretty high for a fund balance, but it's right where we thought we'd be. It's right where we projected to be. It's what we balanced some of our increase of the salary on over the next couple of years. So we looked at it from that. You'll see our capital projects fund over in that fourth column where we have 9.984 remaining. That's again through COVID savings as well. But when you get into that capital projects fund, you're limited with capital projects, either renovations or expenditures over $1,000. And so that's why we were able to do the audiology. That's why we were able to do bridges this year. So that still leaves us at about 5 million there moving forward. And as mentioned earlier in a prior note home to the board in the Friday packet, that's higher than it has been historically. So are there any questions on the final numbers from the ASBR? Okay, next slide, please, Amy. So we're going to get into some budget assumptions, and these should be early, preliminary, in quotes, of could possibly change because DESE hasn't given a lot of guidance yet. The state hasn't given a lot of guidance yet. So in a non-reassessment year, we historically see increase of $2 to $3 million in local revenue. And that's basically through an increase in personal property tax, maybe some new construction. But historically, you don't see a lot of movement there. And so that will be, I know we talked about Blankenship, but that'll be on top. We've already seen the reduction for Blankenship. We'll see that this year. Those numbers will stay that, lower revenue, but we'll get that increase of $2 to $3 million on top of that. We'll start working our way back with an increase in revenue. Like I said, DESE has not indicated what this will look like next year. What we heard today is that the SAT, which is your student adequacy target, will most likely remain the same. They're probably not going to do anything to change that. And so there won't be a lot of difference in the funding for schools next year. They believe at this point it'll be fully funded. Transportation is still woefully underfunded by about $200 million across the district. They basically say that they will reimburse 75% of your transportation needs or expenses. This year, they may come close to 40. Generally, it's in that 25 to 30 range. We've seen it as low as like 17 in some cases here in the past couple of years. So transportation is still underfunded. Investments still remain flat. They gave an example today where back in that 2008, 2009 crash, one of the districts in St. Louis lost 3.5 million. And then with this last COVID crash, they lost $1 million in investments. There's just nothing out there as far as investments right now. So we'll continue to explore that and see what we get. And then we're looking to see a Medicaid revenue. We think that'll increase by approximately $1.5 to $2 million next year with an increase in cost settlement and transportation. So are there any questions on revenue assumptions? Okay, next slide, please, Amy. And then we're looking at major expenditure assumptions. We know the salaries because we have a 2-year contract or a 2-year deal agreement with the unions. So we know we'll increase anywhere between 3.5 and 4% for salaries for that second year of negotiated. And that's with teachers or with paras or with any of our groups. So we're going to continue to monitor that. We'll continue to monitor retirements and vacancies as we go to see what we look at there. We have a current estimation, and again, this is early, of 3 to 5% increase for benefits as we get into next year. We went at about 1.5 last year because nobody was going to the doctor. Nobody was going to the hospital, different things like that. So We've already seen an increase in doctor's visits, emergency room visits, and so we'll see where that gets us. We'll keep the board up to date on that one. We'll monitor purchase service and supplies. Right now, both are under not only under budget for right now, but under where the expenditures were last year. We'll also have to continue with the DISPRO requirement of 15% of our IDEA money or our Part B money, which is approximately $5 million. And then we'll be able to put some ideas of purchase services and supplies together as we get our partner districts, our schools, and our departments' budgets in, and those are due on December 3rd. And then from that point, Cynthia will go ahead and start entering those, and we should have a good idea of where we're looking to be come that January, February board meeting time. Any questions on expenditures? Okay, next slide, please, Amy. And so this is just kind of what we've shown the last couple of years. The blue is our total revenue, light blue, total expenditures, and the gray is the budgeted amount. What we worked on was getting those lines to be closer to each other. And so as we see the last two, the dark blue and light blue, that dark blue revenue line has not been adjusted for Blankenship. But we'll monitor that and we'll adjust it as we go. And then we'll continue to monitor expenses as well. So the board approved deficit spending last year to the tune of about $12 million. We're looking at a $13 million shortfall with Blankenship and the revenue we projected. So we'll continue to monitor to see where that deficit falls. About every $4.5 to $5 million is 1% of our budget. Okay, next slide, please, Amy. So we wanted to touch a little bit on enrollment. As you'll see, if you take a look at 17-18, you'll see 23,045 students. You'll see that next year right up above it, 23,144, 23,321, and then you'll see that COVID dip, 22,669. So we showed historically an increase in enrollment as we went. And once things return post-pandemic, we imagine that will go and follow that trend again. So while we're looking at a decrease in enrollment for last year, we're getting the current numbers for this year, but we imagine that as we return to post-pandemic or pre-pandemic levels, we'll see that increase again. In talking to other schools and other districts, they saw a decrease as well. But that projection number will increase for us as we go. If you would, to the next slide, please.
Hey, Jeff, is that based off a December 1 count?
We don't have the December 1 count,
No,
but yes, those are. Yeah,
Okay.
Historically, yes. I'm sorry. We've had plenty of December ones in the past.
Yes.
So yes, that's what that is. And so still on enrollment here, the county is decreasing while our numbers increase. So county enrollment, not only, so just all of our partner districts are decreasing enrollment, and it's not like a sharp cliff. It's a gradual decline, but ours goes the opposite way and goes up. And we'll have those trend lines in a future PowerPoint. So that's something else we have to keep in mind. As St. Louis County drops, special school district continues to have more students. So we'll have to monitor that as we go. Next slide, Amy. And so just we wanted to touch base and show what we have done over the past 2 years as far as additions. You'll see in that 2021 budget, we added 80 positions while we reduced 29. And then last year we increased 93 while reducing 39. And so we have made quite a commitment to looking at case management, caseloads, equity, DISPRO, and just really adding to where we know we need to do that, where we needed to bring ratios more into line with that. So next slide, please. And so as we continue, we looked at a 15-1, 16-1 ratio as far as where we needed to add staff last year. So if it was above that 16-1, we looked at adding a staff. a staff member. So we're going to use the dashboard that Alan Wheat developed that shows us case management and caseloads. We can drill down to teacher level. And so we can get into that. But we're going to look at 10-to-1 as a justification for a low caseload. We know a lot of our buildings have very high or intense caseloads at times where it is 7-to-1, 8-to-1, and that's very well justified. We just want to make sure we know that. And then we'll look at 17-to-1 as a potential addition, or maybe rearrangement of staff within that district as certain groups go through, or maybe we can move some staff around that keeps that ratio lower there. So we'll continue to work with our coordinators and principals, and we'll have conversations before we would ever do anything about rearranging or moving, so that we would get their voice on this.
Hey, Jeff, one of the questions Scott had is, and you kind of touched on it, we do have, Scott, we have caseload information for every teacher in every district, and it identifies what school they're at. And so Chiquita McRiddle and Tammy Yates are working with each director, and then Kelly Grigsby's working with the SSD schools. But we also recognize that there's a lot of our 10-to-1 is we're going to have quite a few districts or classrooms that are below that because of the nature of the classroom. In our SSD schools, we went lower than that. But what Jeff is saying is that we just are marking that, so we know that we're not going to go above that 10-to-1 for our specialty programs. And generally, those will run between 6 to 8 is what they'll be running. So those will be much lower. But we do have by district, every school, every case manager.
And that data is available. Would I be able to check that out?
Yeah, we can. We've got the spreadsheet, and we've got it identified by school, by each district. So you can click on it. So we'll talk to him about getting you access to be able to look at it.
Okay, thank you.
If nothing else, we can download it and send it to you in the Friday packet. That's being updated. That's actually updated as we go throughout the year, and then when we get to that December 1 count, everything should be clean. So we should have a really good idea of what that looks like here in the next 15 days or so. Okay, next slide, please. And so again, our core value is every student, regardless of learning ability or socioeconomic status, deserves access to the services they need. I love the fact that we moved that up in our budget goals. I think it ties in perfectly. Next slide, please, Amy. And so then that brings us to the Distressed Communities Index. And you see our, some of our areas, Hazelwood, Firk, Floor, Jennings, Rittner and Normandy, Riverview, and then you get into kind of where we monitor Bayless, University City, and Valley Park as well. So we look at those, and then go ahead and go to that next slide if you could. And then that brings us to the end. So at this point, I really just want to, and I know you had a couple other questions about hirings and what that has looked like. We addressed quite a bit through case management last year and disproportionality. So 2 years ago, we added 11 positions with Dispro. We added 7 last year, so now we have a total of 18. And so when we added that into, because a lot of those districts are in both, we have 11 Dispro districts, and we have 8 tier 3 districts. And so we were able to address quite a bit through adding staff, through adding programs, through that disproportionality that really made a difference with those tier 3 districts as well. So that's kind of an overview of where we're at and where we're looking to go. We're going to continue to meet with, we've had budget meetings, optional budget meetings with our directors and our principals. We had one on Friday, we have one Wednesday. We're going to continue to collect information. We'll have that December 3rd. We'll put it together, and then we'll meet with each of our principals and directors, Dr. Keene and myself, and then members of the cabinet and DLT will meet where our directors and principals will have to present. And as they do that, they have to walk through enrollment requests and goals and how they use zero-based budgeting. And then come January, we'll do that with our partner districts as well. And 2 of the slides in the PowerPoint address specific DISPRO requests and specific tier 3 requests. So they will really be able to hone in on what they're looking at as far as plans for that and what they will need in regards to disproportionality as well as the DCI.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that information.
Okay. So any thoughts, any questions, anything you would like to see as we move forward? What information would you like to have?
Well, just with the recent focus on hiring and wondering where those placements are in relation to student staff ratios that we're talking about, wondering if there's areas of greater need that still need to be addressed beyond the DISPRO funding.
Yes, and Scott, that's where we're taking that top tier of schools, those 8 schools. And what I anticipate when we're presenting this back to the committee, we're going to break it out what we're doing for each one of those districts. And we're going to do what we're going to do for the tier 2 and then the tier 3. So you guys will see exactly what their plans are and how we're helping them. Some cases we're adding in an additional coordinator or instructional coach, but we're really working closely with those districts to make sure that they can say, if we just have these things to help us move ahead, that's what we're trying to work with them on. But we will lay it out what we're giving all of our districts, and then what does it look like for the DISPRO and what those plans are, and then what's the top tier, which is those 8 districts that we know are in the distressed zones.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for all your work on that.
You're welcome. Those are great questions. And, if we're going to talk about equity, those are things that we really do just need to spell out and focus on. And I think as we work through this budgeting process, we'll be able to put that right out on the table for not only the budget committee, but the board as well. Anything else, any other kind of guidance or thoughts that you would want as we move forward with this?
Jeff, let's just make sure that all of Scott's questions, that we utilize those questions going forward. We did address the equity, we addressed the staffing, and we'll make sure that, what those ratios are, but let's make sure that in our next 2 presentations with the committee that, we're pretty clear about what those questions are and where they're coming into the presentation.
Perfect. Yep, we can do that. Okay. Any other questions, any other thoughts, anything from the group? Okay, well, thank you guys so much for your time and your guidance. We'll make sure we get we'll follow along what we've done with the equity, the caseloads, the tiers. I think that'll be great as far as information moving forward. So if there aren't any other questions, thank you guys so much for your time, and we'll call it a day.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you guys.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks. Bye-bye.